The Shanghaied Broker by Thomas Byrnes. The Jekyll and Hyde state of affairs, of two entirely different personalities in the same man, is not so uncommon as people suppose. Few men know the depths that are in them. They may be brought out by circumstances, and once a sleeping demon springs into life, he cannot be controlled. There's many a convict who has the finest elements in him, and there are more Jean Valjeans walking the streets of New York than anybody knows except the police, and the police keep the knowledge to themselves. This case is the strange story of George Hollyoak, and it gave us so much trouble and caused so much criticism of the Detective Bureau while it lasted, that the temptation to reveal the facts was strong. They did not come out at the time, however, and the deathbed promise is a binding one on any man who gives it. But as these lines will give no clue to the man's identity or family, there is no reason why they should not be told now. Hollyoak came to New York from the South after the Civil War and built up a fine commission business on the cotton exchange. He soon was recognized as the best authority on the course of the market in the city. A group of his customers who had realized large profits by acting on his advice gave him a dinner at Delmonico's, then situated at Broadway and Chambers Street. It became a jolly occasion, and the guest was in remarkably buoyant spirits. He was credited with telling the best story, singing the best song, and in other ways proving himself the star of the occasion. The entertainment continued until 2 o'clock when Hollyoak, deciding not to go to his apartment uptown, set out to walk 4 blocks to the Astor House. He started alone for the big gray stone hotel, but he never reached it. The only clue obtained of him was from a patrolman on Roosevelt Street, who described a young man in evening dress, evidently under the influence of wine, stumbling along in the direction of the ferry. The police were notified the following day, and later Hollyoak's friends offered a large reward to stimulate the search. No possible reason existed for flight. His business was prosperous and he didn't owe a dollar. The mystery was a deep one, and the papers were full of it for weeks. As weeks ran into months, it was referred to from time to time and grew into a standing cause of complaint against the alleged inefficiency of the police department. We never at any time had the ghost of a clue. My own conviction was that the man had been murdered and thrown into the East River, and the tide being right had been carried out past Sandy Hook into oblivion. The sensation was consequently a great one when 5 months afterward, Hollyoak walked into the exchange one morning just as if nothing had happened, and offered to trade. His friends, at first staggered at the sight of him, gave him a roaring reception and overwhelmed him with questions, which in a cold and surly way he brushed aside. "I've been away, but I'm back and ready for business," he said, and that was all they could get out of him. He was haggard, resembling a man who had had a severe illness, and down his left cheek from the corner of his eye to his jaw was a deep red scar still inflamed. Something serious had happened, but as he would not talk of it, they respected his feelings and left him alone. I called on him because I had given the case days and nights of investigation, and was surprised at the kind of man I found. He had been described as one of youthful, buoyant enthusiasm, but I found a man of 35, cold, polite, haggard and nervous, something like a man with chronic neuralgia. He dismissed the subject with a word, saying it was nobody's business but his own. He did not care to talk about it. That was all he would say. His friends, however, confirmed the entire change in his disposition. He was as good a businessman as ever, but had become entirely unsociable. He would not take a drink, go to a club, or join in a dinner. He had become a silent, moody recluse, who after business hours went to his apartment and saw no one. So the thing passed out of my mind and that of the public and was forgotten. A year later, however, a general alarm was received at all station houses one night, announcing a mysterious murder in the precinct adjoining mine. Hiram Walker, a sea captain and head of a firm that owned a fleet of sailing ships with wharves at Peak Slip, had been waylaid on an unfrequented street near the Battery and killed with a knife. There had been only one thrust, but that was a strong and sure one, given from in front and reaching the heart. Walker was captain of the brig, the Evening Star, which had come into port laden with coffee. She had been absent for almost a year, during which time she had visited several cities in the Mediterranean. She had taken from New York a general cargo of hardware and canned goods. From Smyrna she had gone in ballast to Rio de Janeiro, had been chartered to London, and after taking a local cargo went thence to Pernambuco, returning to New York. After discharging a warehouse in Brooklyn, the brig was towed to a shipyard near Pike Street for extensive repairs. Before the excitement over Walker's murder had died out, the first mate of the Evening Star was found lying in his blood on Catherine Street one night, with a knife wound similar to that inflicted upon the shipping merchant. There were no signs of a scuffle, and his watch and money were undisturbed. The man had died instantly. Nobody heard a cry or saw the crime committed. The narrow street leads to a Brooklyn ferry and is crowded until the boats are laid up for the night. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, when the man met his fate, the street was deserted. The only clue to the murder was a knife, with a keen edge and dagger's point, found in the gutter. The captain and first mate of the Evening Star were notoriously brutal to their men at sea. This gave us a clue. A search of the sailors' boarding houses, in which a second mate gave assistance, showed that every man in the crew of the brig had reshipped and was at sea. Arrests were made, but nobody could be held for the crime. 10 days later, the notification of a stabbing affair that happened on Pike Street was brought to my station at 4 o'clock in the morning. A young man given the name of Peter Grayson had been set upon, and although he had killed his supposed assailant, had been mortally wounded himself. The victim of the murderous attack had been sent to Juvenile Hospital. Not a witness to the beginning of the combat was known, and the dying man refused explanations that would throw light on the homicide. It was impossible, therefore, to determine who was the aggressor. Obviously, there was a mystery in the affair, and my impulse was to go to the hospital in the hope of inducing the wounded man to talk. But many duties detained me for several hours. Meanwhile, a message from the station house where the body of the dead man lay announced its identification as that of Beatty, the second mate of the Evening Star. A sergeant of the precinct remembered the face because the mate and he together had hunted the assassin of the captain. This gave the case a new aspect. Could the dying man clear up the impenetrable mystery surrounding the three murders? In other words, had this last Evening Star crime any relation to the two that had preceded? Instead of going to bed when my watch ended, I drove to Guna Hospital, reaching there before dawn. The man was dying, but before seeing him I gathered all the facts obtainable from the parties who had brought him in. "What is he?" I asked. "A sailor." "How do you know?" "They showed me his clothes. They represented an ordinary sailor's outfit, complete in all particulars. The boots, I remember, were well worn and convincing. It also appeared that the man had spent some hours in a low drinking house near Peck Slip until Beatty came in there, and had followed Beatty when he left. I then suspected that not Beatty but a dying man had been the assailant, that this was the third of the Evening Star murders, and that the murderer, although he had succeeded in his third attempt, had lost his own life in the attack. I then asked to see the man, and met with perhaps the greatest shock in all my detective experience. He was weak from loss of blood, white as marble, and had not an hour to live, but the malignant glitter in his eye was unmistakable. The man before me was Holyoke, the broker. As I recognized him, he recognized me. "Keep it to yourself," said he. "It can do no good to tell it." "I must tell it," said I, "unless you give me a good reason to the contrary. We must have the facts. Give us the facts, and I promise to do the best I can for you." Just then a man came in whom the dying man had sent for. It was the president of the exchange. The dying man, whispering to me, did not say all that I have set down here. His explanation, under my promise of secrecy, backed up by that of his friend, came in single words and sometimes only a look of pain and horror as he attempted to describe what had happened. But it was perfectly lucid and easy to piece together clearly. The main facts were these. The statement of the dying man. You remember my reappearance on the exchange. My sufferings during those 4 months completely changed my nature. Never before had I felt an impulse to kill a living thing, but from the hour of my arrival in New York, a demon within me, sleeping and waking, clamored for the blood of the men who had humiliated me so outrageously. I tried to forget it. I tried to rub it out as a closed chapter and pick up my life where it had left off, and as the months went by I thought I had succeeded. I would have spasms of uncontrollable hate, simply hungering and yearning for revenge on the men who had treated me so terribly. I could not keep from this. It seemed as if all the life in me, my self-respect, my integrity of character as a man, demanded justice at the hands of the free men who had treated me not like a human being, but like a brute. I was getting along very well. The spasms were becoming weaker and more controllable, and I think I should have pulled out all right. When the evening star came into port, then everything went to the winds. I was like a wild man. The thought that these 3 men were in the same city within reach of me dominated every other. I could not think of business. I could not think of anything. I got a sailor's outfit at a hand-me-down shop near the waterfront. Then I began to haunt the saloons near the ship, waiting for Walker. It was to be Walker first, the other 2 in turn. Until that was done, I could think of nothing else. My search was soon rewarded, for late one night I came across Walker in the neighborhood of the Battery. As I came up to him in front, he recognized me. Something about my attitude made him try to avoid me, for he recognized me at once. But he did not try to cry out, only tried to hit me with a big stick he carried. But there was nobody in sight, and I got him. I met the first mate on Catherine Street a few nights later, and finished him also. There was only one left in my scheme of revenge, and you can see the result of that encounter. But I killed him too. That's everything. This is the second disappearance of George Hollyoak. Let it be like the first, unexplained.